I've got two new movies, both about killers, but very different killers and very different movies. Normally on this channel I review one movie for each video, but these are a couple smaller titles with a weird connection. The first is a commercial release for Netflix. The other is an experimental horror film for Shudder. I will be discussing both, but let me warn you, the second movie is full-blown horror, so if that content bothers you, I would suggest just skipping that part of the review altogether. Because though I won't spoil anything, I will be talking about violent aspects of horror films. But first, let's review the inspired by a true story movie, Hitman. Gary Johnson is your standard college professor except for one thing. He moonlights as a hitman for local police sting operations.
Sounds lovely.
Apprehensive at first, Gary begins to thrive in his undercover role. But that all changes when he meets Madison. Out of desperation, she wants to hire a hitman to kill her abusive husband. Immediately, Gary sympathizes with her, and he tries to protect Madison for breaking the law. But this innocent gesture becomes much more complicated when he develops romantic feelings for her. Hitman is written and directed by Richard Linklater, known best for the romantic Before trilogy and coming of age Dazed and Confused. He is one of those filmmakers that you know when you're watching a Linklater film. Personal stories featuring natural, organic performances, interesting dialogue, and existential morality. Hitman has those ingredients, but still doesn't feel much like his previous films. That's not a criticism, just an observation. This film is interesting because it's kind of a throwback to 90s movie star-led summer blockbusters, featuring Hollywood's new it boy Glenn Powell. But it's also kind of a blueprint on how to make a straight-to-streaming movie for people not wanting to go to the theater, with its small cast and clever concept of self-identity. Hitman earns its R rating with some steamy romance that avoids showing too much nudity with its strategic angles, but it is definitely suggestive. The plot, based on a true story, is definitely the hook. It's a bit of a grown man's fantasy. You have this plain guy, which is a tad unbelievable when you cast Glenn Powell, secretly taking down criminals with his hitman facade. The script and performances take this serious scenario and make it really funny and entertaining. And when the plot thickens and characters must improvise, it rises to another level, including one deceptive scene that if you're not smiling ear to ear, maybe movies just aren't for you. I will say there is one moral quandary that shifts the tone of the film dramatically, and I'm not sure it's for the better. For my final rating, Hitman is a movie star making role, allowing Glenn Powell to play some wacky variations of a single character, but the overall story never surpasses the cool concept it introduces. I'm going to give it 3 out of 5 stars, just above average, but definitely worth streaming for free on Netflix. Now to my second movie about a killer, and this character isn't pretending to kill, he's the real deal. Again, if you are averse to horror films, I suggest you skip this portion of the review. You've been warned. Now let's talk about the new slasher flick, In a Violent Nature. When a group of young adults find a locket deep in the woods, they don't realize removing it will awaken something evil, a corpse named Johnny. Now, Johnny slowly moves through the isolated woodland with only one purpose: retrieve his locket, killing every person that gets in his way. As characters begin to face horrors, the truth of the past will be revealed, and they must figure out how to survive this relentless monster. In a Violent Nature is very easy to describe. It's a traditional slasher film, but it's from the perspective of the slasher. What that results in is a movie with all the cliches of a slasher film, but from a completely fresh and unique perspective. For example, a young woman is swimming by herself in a lake. Total cliche. We aren't watching her. We're watching Johnny as he slowly approaches her. This does a couple things. First, it turns the cliches upside down so they feel familiar but new. Secondly, this movie has 0 jump scares. Instead, you're following the killer as he slowly approaches the victim. So rather than being startled, we experience this existential dread as we watch this inevitable death, unlocking a completely different form of fear. Horror movie enthusiasts may find this refreshing, or they may find this as a cheap trick to recycle slasher film tropes. I, who somewhat appreciates this genre, found this to be an original and immersive perspective that celebrates films like Halloween and Friday the 13th. It's interesting that At times, the film shows all the gore of a death, and sometimes it cuts away before the violence takes place. I couldn't quite figure out the motivation of these show or don't show decisions, but it did create in me an uneasiness that led me to literally watching one long discussion scene like this. And it made me peek around my living room to ensure nothing was there. For my overall rating, In a Violent Nature is a gratuitously violent film that says nothing new, but from a different vantage point, and that is satisfying enough for me to give it 3.5 out of 5 stars. But it revels in such extreme violence, it's difficult for me to ethically recommend this sort of content. What are your thoughts on either of these films? Let me know in the comments below. Am I not giving Linklater and Powell enough credit? And you horror aficionados, is In a Violent Nature a rewarding enough experiment? Or is it just recycling from your favorite scary movies? If you enjoyed these reviews, please take a moment and like this video, subscribe to this channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss any of my future reviews. Also, you can check out some of my other reviews by clicking on one of these boxes.